Greetings, everyone. My name is DJ Wells. I'm the Executive Director of the Mensa Research Institute, and you've tuned into our latest installment of the Integrative Mental Health Summit series of webinars. Our partners over at Journey's Dream, and certainly we here at the Mensa Research Institute, were so excited by last year's conference, last October's conference, that we wanted to keep the conversation going. And so we've tried to continue to bring you monthly conversations that talk about some of the important issues that we either started talking about back in last October or we didn't get a chance to talk about. And so this week, or this month, I should say, we've brought back one of our IMHS, our Integrative Mental Health Summit series favorites. Samantha Gilbert was one of our presenters at the conference last October. And I should mention, we have set the dates, and if you've been watching your email announcements, if you're on any of our email lists, you'll know that we've got our second annual conference coming up this coming October, the 7th, 8th, and 9th. And I believe Samantha is planning on joining us again in this coming October, but we've got a really exciting lineup planned for this October. We'll talk about that a little bit more at the end, but today we want to jump right in because we brought Samantha back. She got such a great response during the conference last October. We wanted to bring her back and talk a little bit more about some of the things that she started to talk about during our conference. This whole idea of the gut-brain connection, the idea that that food influences how we think and how we perform and who we are. We wanted to talk to Samantha about that a little bit. So Samantha, thank you so much for joining us today. I think this is going to be a fun conversation.
Likewise, my pleasure. Thank you for having me.
Very good. I want to remind all of you, this is an interactive event. If you have questions for Samantha, feel free to use the Q&A function that should be at the bottom of your screen if you're on a computer, or maybe at the top of your screen if you're on a mobile device. But click on Q&A, type in your question, and towards the end of our conversation with Samantha, we'll make sure that we work in some of those questions that you have. But I'm going to start with a question that I'm kind of cheating a little bit here, Samantha, because you and I have worked with each other a bit, so I kind of know that you've got some great stories about how you first came into working in the field of nutrition and how you kind of got connected to orthomolecular medicine and integrative medicine. So I'd love for you to share maybe a story or two along those lines of how you personally got involved in this.
Yeah, that's a great starting question, DJ, because like so many people that are probably listening in today, I truly didn't believe I would ever overcome my own pain and suffering. And the story that I tell is I essentially kind of came out of the womb struggling with depression and anxiety. I had a lot of OCD around food and body image. Those were my areas. I was suicidal at different points in my life. And that was just all I knew. I know, again, so many people can relate to that, but it wasn't until after spending, I think it was over $100,000. It wasn't until I started to understand what chemistry was and the impact that biochemistry has on the brain and also the body. It wasn't until I met doctors Mensah and Bowman, who are my doctors, by the way, so I am a patient, that I started to understand how the brain works, how chemistry works, how certain imbalances impact our brain and neurotransmitter activity. And it's been my mission and my goal since I started over 13 years ago now as a practitioner, to help people and to educate people to understand what's going on in their bodies biochemically and that they have more power than they realize. I know for me, I took a lot of bad advice. I went down so many wrong paths. It was painful. I was very vulnerable. So I was easily manipulated by maybe people that didn't have my best interest at heart. And it was such a learning experience for me. But you know what? It brought me to this place, and I'm so grateful because I really can understand and put myself in my clients' shoes and be able to support them in that way. It's turning pain into purpose, right? So that's basically how I understood how the brain works and how chemistry works, and became a practitioner.
That I'm so inspired by that you were able to take something that was problematic for you and turn it into a passion, that you were able to, not only overcome it, but also to be able to share your experiences and your knowledge gained from that with so many other people. It really is inspiring.
Thank you.
Well, then let's jump into some of the questions that are related to the work that you do. And let's start with kind of just a broad question. We so often hear the cliche, you are what you eat. Comment on that. Is that true? Does food really impact literally who we are, both physically and mentally?
Yeah, this is another great question, because over the years, what I've learned is that we often don't realize how much food does impact us, especially our brain, especially cognitive functioning. I'm sure a lot of people that are listening in today have experienced negative reactions to foods that are high in sugar and gluten and, dairy products, highly processed dairy products. Those are what I call kind of the three big triggers. And what's amazing about this is more and more research is coming to light about just how toxic these foods are and how over time they can actually lead to autoimmune diseases. And of course, we know that autoimmunity can impact the brain in a significant way. It's not just the body, it's not just Hashimoto's, it's not just rheumatoid arthritis. There are significant impacts on the brain as a result of these foods that quite honestly aren't really food anymore. These foods can actually create OCD, anxiety, severe depression. We now know there's a link between food and schizophrenia and the gut microbiome. More and more research is coming to light about that. And one thing I have to say, and I need to be honest about this because I think it's so relevant and important to this question about how food impacts us, is that the tragic part of this is that it's by design. Big pharma, big ag, they know the chemicals that they use in food production are toxic. They continue to use them anyway because, let's be honest, they put profits over people. And this is an area of education that is important to me and the people that I work with and the content that I put out, because we really need to be aware. And I think that the more aware we are, the more research that we do for ourselves, the more empowered that we are to take charge of our own health. A great example of a neurotoxic endocrine disrupting chemical is glyphosate. It's used in every single stage of food production, from planting to desiccation of foods like oats and almonds and legumes, things that we think of as very healthy. And in their natural state, yeah, these foods can be wonderful for us. But when they're laden with a lot of chemicals, when they're genetically modified, they start to disrupt our chemistry. So one way or one thing that I do and that I recommend to my own clients is check out websites like eatwild.com, find your local farmers, develop relationships with them, because the direction that we're going in with our food supply, again, it's appalling. And I want you to be empowered. I want you to know that there are resources, even if there isn't anyone locally. There are some wonderful regenerative farmers. You can order their products online. They can ship them to you. I do that a lot. So that's really the crux of it. We're dealing with, most people are aware of, again, a Snickers bar really isn't going to be the best option. Oreo cookies, which was my personal favorite many years ago, Along with Ben and Jerry's, by the way, I went on many a binge with both of those, to be honest with you.
As have many of us.
Yes, as have many of us. There's no shame, no judgment.
Right.
But we know those foods now are not really food, but it's tricky now, right? Because even the things, as I mentioned a moment ago, that are quote healthy are being laden with chemicals that are really impacting us. So I hope that's helpful. I think that's really important.
Absolutely. Now, to that end, though, so often, I was just in the grocery store last night, and they've got the organic section over here, and the non-organic section, which is much larger, and the organics cost a little bit more, and all of that. But are we really, can we be confident that those, you mentioned having a relationship with individual farmers. Can we be confident that things that are labeled organic in the grocery store really are absent of the types of chemicals and processing that you're talking about?
Yeah, another excellent question, because more and more we're finding out that that's not the case. Now, let me just say that organic is always going to be better, because there are definitely rules around organic. You cannot use glyphosate with organic. That is banned. However, here's the challenge. Glyphosate is so much a part of our world and our soil and our food supply, that how could it not be impacted? I still encourage people, please choose organic as much as possible. Do research on the companies that you choose to support, and I provide a lot of those resources with the people that I work with. But it's still good, but I think that be mindful of something that just says natural, that just says non-GMO. They have a lot of those little societies now, those little labels. GMO doesn't really mean much, except that it's not genetically modified. Mm-hmm. It still is utilizing glyphosate and a lot of these other chemicals. So it's a great question, and it can go both ways. I still think please choose organic as much as you can. It is worth it.
I just want to point out from a logistical standpoint here, I saw that somebody raised their hand during the webinar. Please, if you've got questions, type them into Q&A, and we will make sure that we get to those questions before we wrap things up today. So something that's stressed on your website, Samantha, and something that we certainly speak to here at Mensa Medical is bioindividuality. The fact that that everybody's chemistry is different. And so I would anticipate then that everyone's diet should be different. Can you speak to that a little bit?
Yeah, this is really important, because I think we are living in I know, and I think everyone can agree, we're living in an age of overload of information. And, we have technology, and technology can be a beautiful thing. But what I'm seeing from the perspective of where I sit as a practitioner and someone that works in this space, people are going online, getting diametrically opposed information and getting really confused, getting more stressed out. That's triggering the nervous and limbic systems, and that can lead down a whole different path. So yes, the concept of bioindividuality is really key, because there's only one you on the planet. I mean, you're beautifully made, you're beautifully designed. Even if you're a twin, there's only one epigenetic you. And that's, Dr. Mensah and I have talked about that in previous, webinars and things that we've done. So for example, if you are someone that is undermethylated, and that's something that we have talked about quite a bit previously, that means that foods that are high in folate actually can be detrimental for you. But guess what? What are those foods? They're avocados, they're spinach, they're a lot of the wonderful lettuces that we enjoy that we put in our salads. Things that, again, are very healthy, but are they healthy for me? I am undermethylated. This is something that runs in my family. It's not uncommon for this to run in families. We see this a lot. Being a vegan or a vegetarian as an undermethylator probably is going to be very difficult because we're going to need those methyl molecules, those methyl groups to support neurotransmitter activity, hormone production, enzymes, etc. And we can't get that from a plant-based diet. We don't want something that is going to take away what we already don't make enough of, and we already don't make enough methyl, thus the term undermethylation. So that's one good example. Another big one is copper. So copper overload or copper toxicity is something that we commonly see, that we work with. And things like, I hate to say it, I'm sorry guys, but chocolate, nuts and seeds, all those wonderful things that we love tend to be, mostly plant-based products, tend to be really, really high in copper, and they can be triggers for us, and our chemistry of copper is high. So those are some really good examples of how even something that we know is a whole food, a nourishing food, might not be so great for us and can be a trigger. And when I start working with people, they'll often already know, gosh, I realize that when I add this spinach to my smoothie, I don't feel so great afterwards. I kind of feel anxious. I'm a little depressed. My energy is maybe not so great. And it's a pattern that I'm noticing. So those are some good ways of, or good examples, excuse me, of bioindividuality.
So someone just asked a question that's specifically related to this, so I'm going to just drop that in right here. And the question comes from someone who says that she is indeed undermethylated, but she's also been a vegetarian for most of her life. So how do you overcome that if you're not used to eating meats and other sources of protein? How do you overcome that oxymoron of a diet?
Yeah, that's a great, I get that a lot because so many people, and I used to be vegan myself. So many people come to me and they realize their diet just isn't, supporting them anymore. Maybe at one time it did. I know when I first went vegan, I felt amazing. But over time, I started to feel, I didn't know it was happening at the time, but over time, again, that folate was stripping away that methyl, and I had a complete and total crash. So the best answer to that question is to go slow. I like to start people off slow. I never want to throw the whole kitchen sink at you. Start with one meal. If you have an adversity to animal protein in general, that could be a gut infection. That could also be low zinc. We need zinc for taste and smell. And often I see that is also low in an undermethylated individual. And we just start very slow. And it doesn't have to be something that you do overnight. I really think that, there's a saying about how going slow wins the race. And taking our time. So without knowing you specifically, that's my initial very best guidance there.
You used a term during something that you said just a short while ago. You used the term microbiome, and lately, as you said, we live in an internet age, and there's tons of information out there, and there's a lot of gut related or digestion related or health related terms that have kind of worked their way into our usual lexicon. They've worked their way into common speech, and yet I think a lot of people don't really know exactly what those terms mean or why they're important to us. So I'm going to first ask you to define and explain microbiome, but there's a couple of other similar types of words that I want to make part of this kind of rapid fire here. So tell us what microbiome is and why we should care about it, and then I'll ask you a couple more like that.
Yeah. Another excellent question, because to say that the connection between the brain and the gut is profound, really, it's such an understatement, because your gut, your microbiome is this, and I get excited talking about it, so forgive me, because I'm always learning more and more. I'd say as a community of scientists and researchers, we're always learning more and more, right? So your gut microbiome is just this highly, highly intelligent ecosystem of organisms, and they crosstalk with one another. And bacteria, of course, we hear a lot about bacteria. They tend to dominate this ecosystem, but we also have viruses, fungi, protozoan, a lot of other organisms exist there, and they live in harmony with each other. So your microbiome, or I should say your gut microbiome, and we have several different microbiomes, I'll get into that in a moment, but your microbiome in your gut is defined as all of these organisms, including their genetic elements. And another thing that's really fascinating to me about the gut microbiome specifically, and us as human beings, is that we literally have hundreds of bacterial species, thousands of strains, and millions of genes within us. And just to give you a comparison of how vast this is, the human microbiome contains over 1 million genes, yet our human genome is only 23,000 genes. So you get an idea of how vast that is. It's like a huge circle here, tiny little circle here. That's our human genome. And this ecosystem supports a healthy immune system, helps with nutrient acquisition. So a big thing that I work with my clients is a condition called malabsorption, where even if you're taking a supplement or those wonderful whole foods that you've started eating, there can be a challenge absorbing those nutrients. And that's what these species also help with. And they also are amazing because they help us resist infections. And that's a big part of their job, is just supporting the immune system as a whole and keeping us safe from infection. Additionally, I'm going to get into other microbiomes. So we also have an oral microbiome, and that's going to crosstalk with our gut microbiome. And then women have a vaginal microbiome that coats their babies when they come through the birth canal. And that coating protects baby, gives the start of their immune system, and then breastfeeding continues that. So mother's milk, most people know, is amazing. There was a time, kind of back in the 50s and so forth, when it was uncouth to breastfeed. Some of you may remember that time, but we now know that mother's milk is this amazing composition of probiotics and other immune enhancing substances that gives baby their immune system. And it's also a time for them to bond. So a lot of oxytocin is created during that process as well. So that's kind of the overview there. You have amazing intelligence in your gut. We often hear, well, I just had a gut feeling about that, or that just didn't feel right. And I walked by a certain place, maybe I'm downtown, I'm walking downtown, I walk by an alley and that just didn't feel right. That's your gut intelligence talking to you. And it's profound.
So you've actually touched on a couple of the other terms that I wanted to bring into this kind of larger question of defining these key terms. You talked about gut intelligence, and I know that there's something that we call the enteric nervous system, or ENS.
Yep.
And that's part of that, right?
Oh, yeah, because what we have is this bi-directional connection between the brain and the gut. Many of you may already know this. It's called the gut-brain axis. And if that's underdeveloped, or again, that ecosystem of species, the soup, if you will, becomes imbalanced, this can lead to what we call leaky gut or intestinal permeability. And I know that we'll get into that in a moment, but ENS is really fascinating because it's the enteric nervous system. It's actually a neurological system, and it lines the entire digestive tract. And again, going back to, gosh, I just have a gut feeling. Well, that's your ENS. It's got tons of nerve endings. It's got actually more nerve endings than the spinal cord does. It's a very, very dense neurological tissue. And it's second only to the brain in terms of the number of nerve endings that it has, just to give you an idea. It's fascinating. So the gut and the gut bacteria have access to the entire nervous system, and the enteric nervous system is directly connected to the brain via the vagus nerve. And the vagus nerve is also called the wandering nerve because it literally goes from the gut to the brain. It's got all these amazing wandering branches, if you will. If you think of a big, beautiful tree with all these branches, so it wanders from the brain into the organs, the neck, the chest, the abdomen, everywhere, and it connects everything. It's fascinating. And this amazing nerve, it performs a lot of functions, including communication, as I shared. It impacts the digestive tract in a profound way, even things like respiration, heart rate function, speech, taste, sensation, even fear management is connected to the vagus nerve. So if there's dysfunction, as I share, and I kind of touch briefly on leaky gut, if there is dysfunction of the development of the neuronal tissue itself, meaning there isn't like this proper signaling going on between the gut and the brain, this alone can impact behavior and mood, and even memory and response. Often our patients will say to us, yeah, my time management is really off. It's not just brain fog, but I really am, my awareness of time is, it's really skewed. And I often hear that a lot. But most of the time what goes wrong, so I talked about the neuronal tissue itself. Most of the time what's going wrong is it's going back to those microbes, right? It's the wrong type of microbes that are starting to inhabit the gut, and they can get overgrown and grow to high levels, and that's going to impact the brain. And that's also going to, and it can damage to a certain extent, the vagus nerve when those species are overgrown. We call that opportunistic bacteria or pathogenic. SIBO is another term I'm sure many of you have heard, SIBO and SIFO, which is fungal overgrowth. So that can damage and impact how they operate. Because the bacteria, again, they're helping to produce neurotransmitters in the gut. They're also helping to synthesize hormones. So it's amazing. I could go on and on. I'm sorry, DJ.
No, not at all. Not at all.
I don't want to overwhelm the conversation here, but
this is great stuff.
There's just so much I can say.
Absolutely. And you used the term leaky gut.
Yeah.
And you kind of got it at what it is, but we hear it so often now. People really, we see it in magazines and health magazines, even, stop your leaky gut. Well, what exactly does that mean?
What does that even mean? Yeah. So yeah, and that's another really important question, because even though that term has been a part of our awareness for so long, I think most people still, they read it, but don't really know what it means. So if we go back to the ecosystem, right, and the imbalances that are so common these days. I know I've had leaky gut. I would say the vast majority of the people that I work with have leaky gut, even though may not be aware of it. So basically, it's this ecosystem that's becoming imbalanced. And when we have that overgrowth of what we call dysbiotic flora or bacteria or yeast, what happens is they tend to poke holes in the gut. And they create what's called intestinal permeability. So if you think of a screen that's going to, like, as a sifting mechanism, things are going to pass through that screen. Like if you're sifting flour, for example, you're making some muffins, the recipe calls for you to sift your flour to make it a little bit more fine. We don't want that with your gut. We don't want things passing through. We want proteins, food molecules. We want bacteria to stay where it's supposed to stay. We want stomach acid, which is highly acidic, to stay where it's supposed to stay. And so when it's not in balance, when it's not doing what it should, there can be challenges there with your gut being leaky. And I want to say just briefly, leaky gut, diet is a big part of leaky gut. Stress, I know people don't want to hear it because we live in a stressful world. We cannot get rid of stress. I cannot get rid of stress in my life, but there are, I'm sorry, what? Go ahead.
I said, I'd sure like to get rid of stress.
Yeah, me too. Absolutely. I mean, we know we're not going to be able to get rid of it, but there are things that we can do to modulate that better. Diet's one piece. You know, I talked at the summit last year. I talked a lot about things like meditation or prayer or other stress lowering lifestyle practices that you can bring in. But you have a lot of power. I talked about that in the beginning. I talked about power with diet, power with what you choose to expose yourself to and put inside your body. Because let's be honest, the standard American diet, the Western diet, it really disrupts the gut and what we call immune homeostasis. So that's equilibrium between elements. And remember, I said your gut is comprised of a lot of different things, including their genetic elements. And those things just start to, you know, become imbalanced when we eat things that are inflammatory. So I hope that's helpful.
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. One other term that, again, you've used in one of these responses, but that gets kind of kicked around a lot in the emerging vernacular of health, is probiotics. And you mentioned that you know that a mother's milk has a lot of great probiotics. So what's the difference between a probiotic and an antibiotic, and why do we need one and not the other? Why do we need both?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, another great question. So I guess I'll just start off with what is the general definition of a probiotic? And you know, the working definition that I don't necessarily agree with, but I'll just share it anyway. It's basically live bacteria and yeasts, the good guys that support your digestive and therefore your immune system. I've talked a lot about the immune system already. And that's the general definition, but I don't like that definition because we have so much more research now about probiotics and how studies that have been done found a very large percentage of probiotics on the market. They get completely obliterated by stomach acid and they're pretty much useless. You know, they're often, you know, we're told they need to be refrigerated or they're going to go bad. And but the actual data kind of tell a different story. And you know, I mentioned a bit ago the metabolic function of being human comes more from microbial genetics rather than our own genetics. Not that our own genetics aren't, you know, don't play a huge role, because they do. And one of the reasons that I really like spore-based probiotics is because they have this capacity of putting, they have this armor-like coating around themselves because that's how they exist in their normal environment. And they're called bacillus endospores, and this coating allows them to survive the gastric system. And so what's cool about spores is that they go in and they selectively regulate the immune response because they're interacting with the immune system in the gut. And interesting things like Peyer's patches and other tissues in the gut. And so they do this with a process called competitive exclusion. And this is the ability of bacteria to fight off dysfunctional bacteria. And we don't get that with just, you know, taking a high dose, you know, high strain, you know, variety of strains probiotic. And I think it's fascinating that we know that they're able to do that. They'll come into the gut. They have this sensing mechanism where they read the microbial signatures in the gut, and then they identify the problem and they go to work getting rid of the overgrown guys. So they'll go and actually sit next to those microbes and they'll produce like antimicrobials and so forth, and basically go in and help with removing the dysfunctional bacteria. So I hope, I know I kind of threw some, you know, maybe more some science at you, but
No,
want people to know that, yeah, a lot of
we
what's on the
love
market.
science, Sandy. We love science.
I mean, basically what I'm trying to say is that spores make sense because they're modulating, orchestrating a return of your own microbiome versus just adding in specific strains. And I've got, there's a Cleveland Clinic study on C. diff and spores. There's a study that was done not long ago by Dr. Jan Walter, a Papua New Guinea study that really was fascinating for me when I read that. And I'm happy to provide those if anyone wants. But the whole point is, kind of going back to food, there's a lot of marketing that's going on with probiotics and food. And I think we as consumers, just being educated and understand how these things really work in the body is key. Absolutely.
Absolutely. One other term that is part of that whole marketing consumer thing that you just mentioned is prebiotics as opposed to probiotics. Can you explain the difference?
Yeah, and then postbiotics, and then we have ghost biotics, all kinds of interesting biotics. So yeah, I love prebiotics. So foods that are high in something we call resistant starch are considered a prebiotic. Ground flax seeds are a good example. Sometimes I will bring those into the diet of the people that I'm working with. There are certain foods like tiger nuts that are also very high in this resistant starch. Cooked and cooled potatoes, another example of a food that, of course, they have to be cooked and cooled. And when you do that multiple times, you create more resistant starch. So I know potatoes get a bad rap. I don't think they're all bad. Again, it depends on your terrain. It depends on the individual that you are, the amazing individual that you are. So prebiotics are wonderful and they're important because they are good guys need food. That's all you need to remember. Think of a garden. If you have a garden, what do you need to give that garden to make it thrive and to make it grow? There are a lot of elements there. Water is obviously a big element. Some type of fertilizer or manure or some type of source to give oxygen and so forth into the soil to allow things to grow. So I want you to think of your microbiome as this beautiful garden and having a lot of a wide variety of different foods that can provide a food source for, again, the good guys in your gut is really key. So that is what a prebiotic is. Very good.
Now, we have a question that came in asking if there's a better time of day to take prebiotics and probiotics, or to use prebiotics, to take probiotics, even to take antibiotics. Is there a better time of day to make use of these?
Absolutely. And you did ask about antibiotics earlier, and I apologize. I just realized I didn't answer that question. So, in my practice, I'm not a doctor, so obviously I'm not prescribing. In my practice, I use what are considered botanical antimicrobials, and I love them because unlike an antibiotic, a prescription-based antibiotic, botanicals actually work, they're antimicrobial, antifungal, antiviral, many of them inherently on their own. So there isn't the need to add in more things. Now, I might use a certain amount, or excuse me, different types together in the same patient, depends on their gut and the infection. But I think in terms of timing, again, it really depends on the individual. Now, if I'm doing an antimicrobial protocol, and I see that someone's like really high in C. diff, or they've got like streptococcus, or there are some bacillus spores that can be really elevated and cause a lot of anxiety. Or even H. pylori can cause a lot of anxiety. If I see that, I generally don't always add in the prebiotics. So I'll have someone take earlier in the day, usually on an empty stomach, I'll do a botanical, and then I might have them do a spore-based probiotic later on in the day. But again, the research shows with spores specifically, even if you take them together, the spores are still going to be beneficial. So we often think of antibiotics and antimicrobials, even if they're botanical, they're going to go in and kill everything. So if you're taking a probiotic, oh, you just wasted your money because you took those together. Well, again, the research is saying something entirely different. So I think a lot of that guidance maybe is just, when we didn't have all the information that we needed. And everyone, please forgive me. I just realized that my my power source, I need to plug in my power source. So do you mind if I just do that really quick? Because I don't want to lose you.
No, we absolutely don't want to
Okay.
lose you. So
Okay, I will be right back.
take
Thank
a
you.
second to plug in, and while Samantha's doing that, let me remind everyone that a lot of the questions that we're seeing coming in right now are asking for very specific treatment advice. Neither Samantha nor I are doctors, and so we want to be very careful about answering those kinds of questions. And so if you're asking, specifically about your case, oftentimes the best answer for that is to speak to your doctor. Please know that if some of you asked some very specific questions and we don't get to those questions directly, it's because we would much rather you speak to your individual physician about that. And to that end, Samantha, now that you're all powered up.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you for your grace and understanding.
So at Mensa Medical, the treatment that we engage in is, we identify those biochemical imbalances, and then doctors Mensah and Bowman prescribe a nutrient program that helps you overcome those imbalances and thereby helps to treat those cognitive challenges that you might be having. How can diet either support or undo the prescriptions that are being provided by the doctors, or is that happening?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I think that's why it's such a beautiful marriage, right? Because we know that when the diet is on board and is honoring a patient's chemistry, that their nutrient therapy program is going to work so much better. And that's just the honest truth. And we see it time and time again in our patients that are able to make the dietary changes. And, I talked about malabsorption a bit ago, and I talked about leaky gut and how it just dysregulates things. And we find that people absorb their nutrients better. We find that they feel better. They progress faster when the diet, again, there's synergy there, right? So when the diet is in line with the chemistry. And I gave an example of, an undermethylated individual like myself trying to be vegan, which I did for many years, and didn't turn out so well. When I started adding in, and again, slowly, some really high quality animal products, wow, I felt a heck of a lot better. And then when I added my nutrient therapy protocol in, it was profound. It was really profound. So it's a wonderful synergy. I encourage everyone to always consider diet when they're working with Dr. Mensah and Dr. Bowman.
Very good. And I just we just got a question / comment that came in saying that one of our viewers knows someone who had a similar experience as you, Sam, that they came in, was struggling, got on a program, and had their life turn around, and that's so gratifying to hear. And so thank you for sharing that. And the question that was connected is, can people connect with our practice and your practice remotely? And certainly the answer is yes, but I'll let you talk about that a little bit as well.
Yeah, and I thank you, DJ. I wanted to make sure that I you had another question in here. Can diet undo nutrient therapy? Can it replace nutrient therapy?
Yes.
So those are really important questions, and those are questions that I get a lot. People email me all the time asking about that. Now, your nutrients, they're going to support you. They're going to help you. But can diet undo what you're doing and create dysregulation? Absolutely. Inflammation is inflammation. One of the questions I ask people, well, I want you to think, is this really food that you're eating? Because food is any nourishing substance that is eaten, drunk, or otherwise taken into the body that sustains life, it provides energy, and it promotes growth. And if it's not doing that, then it's not really food. So yes, like I said, without having that synergy with the diet and the nutrient therapy together, you're not going to get as far as you would like, unfortunately. I know we want the easy way out, and it's easier to take a pill than to learn how to do some basic cooking. It's easier to not have to deal with that, but it's so rewarding. And you don't have to be, a celebrity chef to learn how to cook. It can actually be quite rewarding. And at the same time, can it replace nutrient therapy? No. We know that nutrient therapy is the very definition of nutrient therapy is therapeutic. That's the key word. Therapeutic doses of nutrients utilized for the individual based on their chemistry to actually go in and change brain chemistry. You can't get that with diet. I wish that were the case, but you'd be eating a heck of a lot of meat. And even if all you ate was meat, you're still not going to get all that you need to, again, go in and really shift chemistry. So I hope that's helpful.
Oh, absolutely. And you specifically said you'd be eating a whole lot of meat. That's specifically speaking to undermethylated people, right?
Yes, because we know in our overmethylated population, they actually do way better on folates. So in those individuals, I'm saying, okay, let's cut down on the animal protein. Still need a little bit. Let's cut down on the animal protein. Let's add more of those wonderful folate foods in. So again, people, I want you all to know, it's not black and white. It's not this or that. We don't need to argue vegan versus paleo or carnivore or whatever label you want to slap on it. We need to just honor that we're all unique. And hey, it's okay. You're not a bad person if you do better eating animal protein. We need to get over that.
I just had someone type in a question that I love just because it's worded funny, and that is there a way to not eat animal products and still not shove the undermethylated person under the bus?
Thank you for that question. I get that a lot too. I wish that were the case, because and trust me, I've tried. Okay, I was vegan for many years. I was vegetarian and vegan. I've tried. I have done every experiment known to man. Utilizing things like eggs, which, by the way, a lot of people don't tolerate because they also are cross-reactive with gluten. A lot of people don't know that. So if you've got leaky gut and you've got high immune activity of those gliadin proteins in your gut, which is gluten intolerance, chances are eggs really might not work for you. So I wish that I could say yes, because I've said this before, I really love being vegan. It's a very clean way to eat. And I loved all my salads. I still love my salads. But I have yet to find a way to really support an undermethylated individual without some form of animal protein. And again, you don't have to be a carnivore necessarily to be successful. I eat a lot of plants. Remember, plants are prebiotics and they're good for our guts, okay? But cutting them out entirely, I don't know. So again, I don't mean to throw you under the bus. I'm so sorry, but I want to be honest.
Absolutely. Now, so we've determined through our conversation here that different diets impact different people in different ways. How do I figure that out? How do I determine that I'm copper toxic, and therefore, if I am copper toxic, what food should I be avoiding? How do I determine that I'm undermethylated or overmethylated, and therefore I should or shouldn't be eating meats or leafy green vegetables? How do we make those determinations?
Yeah, another excellent question that I get a lot, because there's so much, again, diametrically opposed information on the internet about how to test for methylation. We see everything from homocysteine, which is not correct, to hair tissue analysis for copper and everything in between. So we have to test you. Now, I have a free assessment on my website that's just a place for you to get started, to kind of see and get a feel for what your chemistry might be. Again, keyword might, but you have to be tested with laboratory testing. We've been doing this for a long time. We know all the tests that are the best tests to determine methylation status, and copper and pyrrole disorder and so forth. So please know that testing is really key, along with the assessment. And once we figure that out, then it's wonderful, because then we know how to help you. I know what diet is going to be appropriate for you. Getting back to the gut again, if there's a gut infection, sometimes we have to focus on that first before we segue into a diet for your specific chemistry. It's so many nuances there, excuse me, because everyone's unique.
A question that came in earlier that I'm just going to kind of come back to, because it's something that you talked about before, and that's this notion of brain fog. How does that happen? What do we eat that causes it, and what's the process that makes that occur?
Yeah, brain fog, so common, right? I mean, I know that's a huge challenge for so many people, and I think it's going back to leaky gut and going back to dysbiotic or pathogenic overload of bacteria. That alone can create a lot of brain fog for an individual. Yeast specifically can be really devastating. So if we're looking at the gut and we're looking at, again, microbial overgrowth, those are classic underlying causes of brain fog. Other things that can contribute to brain fog are going to be the imbalances that we work with. And often, if I'm working with a female and her hormones are not balanced, and often the gut has the gut is connected to hormone balance as well. When we start to repair that and look at that and start balancing hormones, that can also remedy the brain fog too. So I always go to the gut whenever I hear brain fog.
Absolutely, and we've all had it happen where you eat a big heavy meal.
Yep.
And then all
hangry.
That gut starts working, and you're ready to take a nap.
Yeah, and that's it's interesting because I have been working lately with several ladies, and they all kind of came into my practice at the same time. And lately, our conversations have centered around, wow, I really noticed the difference when I eat, an unprocessed whole foods diet. I went away for the weekend, and my husband and I had fried chicken and hot fudge sundae, and we really had a great time. And oh my gosh, I totally right away noticed the difference. Does that mean I never get to eat, pleasure foods? And I always say, no, it doesn't. I'm glad you went, and I'm glad you had fun. You learned something. You learn something in that process. And I think that's really important. And it kind of goes back to what I said earlier. Is that really food? I know that, even where I'm at in my healing journey, and as I've mentioned, I've had leaky gut myself. If I eat those foods now, I'm going to feel pretty crappy. My body's not used to that stuff. Our bodies in general are not used to those foods. So the reaction is an autoimmune reaction. The body is saying, I don't like this. your immune system's going into overdrive and it's responding accordingly. It can be blood sugar dysregulation, it can be brain fog, it can be anxiety or depression, or just you want to take a nap.
You know, it's kind of a cost benefit analysis here. You know, is it worth it feeling a little crappy for a while because it just tastes so good, and we're all guilty of that.
Absolutely. And there's no judgment there. And one thing I'll say is when you start feeling better and you're eating, again, whole unprocessed foods, you realize how those foods don't taste as good as they used to. I know if I were to have an Oreo cookie at this point, it would just taste like chemicals to me. And I hear that time and again, working with people in my practice. It's like, I'm just not attracted to that anymore. It doesn't hold, it doesn't grab me like it used to. I don't have that overwhelming desire, you know, that sweet tooth, that, you know, that overwhelming urge to have that food. It's amazing how these processed foods, I often say they kind of pervert our taste buds.
Absolutely. So Samantha, we're just about running out of time here. And I want to be respectful of your time. So I want to let everyone know, before we wrap up, I'm going to make sure that I let everyone know how to get in touch with Mensa Medical. We'll give Samantha an opportunity to share how to get in touch with her. We've had questions about working with patients remotely. You know, we're based in Chicago. Samantha, you're on the East Coast. You know, but folks, both of us work with patients all over the country, if not all over the world. And so we'll make sure that you have those connections. I'll also share with you how to revisit this webinar in case there's stuff that you just want to make sure that you get from our conversation before, or if you want to share it with somebody else. I'll make sure we get to all of that before we end. But Samantha, you're the expert here. I've asked a bunch of questions from my layperson's perspective. As the expert, what questions have I not asked that you think are important that we share with our audience today before we wrap up?
Yeah, and they've been amazing questions, DJ. So I appreciate the opportunity to be here. The one thing that I think of that comes to my mind is, please know that healing takes time. And just because it's taking longer than maybe you and your practitioner, if you're working with a practitioner, wanted, you're on the right path. And sometimes we need more than one person to support us. That's okay. But I just want to always leave on the note of giving people encouragement and letting them know I was in my early 30s before I finally figured out what my chemistry was. That's a long time to go through life feeling crappy, you know, struggling with an eating disorder, struggling with high anxiety, being suicidal. You know, again, I mentioned I had severe depression. That's a long time, especially for a child. So just remember that, again, healing is a process that takes time. Far too often we see people give up before the miracle happens. And I don't want you to give up before the miracle happens for you, because even if you feel like it's just too much, you just have so much going on, how am I ever going to heal this? It's amazing how things can turn around.
Thank you so much for that. That is so very important. And we talk all the time here at Mensa Medical about how often people, not only do people feel, but people are even told by other medical practitioners that there's nothing that can be done. And it's just a matter of providing that hope and providing that guidance. And again, sharing the message that you just shared, that sometimes it's going to take a minute, but once you commit to it, that healing absolutely can occur.
Yes, and can I just add on to that, DJ?
Please.
Is that all right? I know
Please.
We're almost out of time, and I want to be respectful of everyone's time as well. But you know, I hear that in my practice every week when I talk with a new patient. It really upsets me because I get angry for the people that I work with, because the relationship you have with your practitioner should be one where you're heard and you're listened to and you're validated. And if you're being gaslit or told, you know, you're just too complicated, here's a script for whatever SSRI, or you know, here, just go see a psychiatrist. That's not healing. Fire those people, get rid of them. You don't need that in your life. So I just want to speak into that a little bit. Find a practitioner that, you know, I'm asked this question a lot, if it's okay if I go into this, DJ, but find a practitioner. Like, I know for me, I will offer a complimentary, what I call a discovery call, just to see if we're a good fit before you even spend any money with me. Not everyone offers that. I'm not saying that's a prerequisite, but I want to understand if I can even help you. And I know that many of you have spent a lot of money on your healing journey, just like I have. I know it seems overwhelming, but do the research, try and talk to people beforehand if you are able to, get a sense for how they work with people, if they know how to listen. I think that right there, that support piece is a big part of the healing process.
Just an awesome message, Samantha. Thank you so much for that. So how do people work with you? How do people find you? How do people get that discovery call with you and then move on from there?
Yeah, that's a great question. So my website is eatfor.life, not .com, EATFOR, not number 4, .LIFE. And you'll see all the buttons for book a discovery call. You'll fill out a short little intake form, and then you know, we'll reach back out and get you scheduled. As you shared, DJ, I know in my practice, because I'm working remotely with people, I've been able to help people all over the world. We can get you tested. We're able to work with our lab here to get you tested. So that's not a challenge. And I find that people are more comfortable actually working remotely these days because they don't have to get in their car. They don't have to go anywhere. You're in your own private space. It just, I find that most people just feel more comfortable going about a relationship in that sense.
Sure. And for those of you that have submitted questions that we didn't get to, please do reach out to us again through Samantha's website or through our information website and email. If you're interested in working with Mensa Medical, again, we also work with patients remotely. And so you can go to info@mensamedical.com, and Mensa is MENSAH. So info@mensamedical.com. And our clinical coordinators can put you in touch with me directly. Certainly they can schedule appointments with the doctors and get you down, traveling down that path towards healing. Also, again, if you were late coming to this and wanted to go back and see some of the earlier parts of the webinar, if you want to revisit some of the things that we talked about just to make sure that you heard Sammy right, and you've got all the information that you need. We are partnering in this series with our friends over at Journey's Dream. They have a free online mental health community called Amity. And so if you go to journeysdream.org/Amity, you can join that online mental health community. And in that community, you can find all of the webinars that we've done over the course of these last several months that are part of the Integrative Mental Health Summit series. Again, that's journeysdream.org/Amity. And again, Sammy's website is eatfor.life. Our website is mensamedical.com. and to send us an email. It's info@mensamedical.com. Boy, that was a mouthful, wasn't it?
You did great, though.
Sammy, thank you so much for being with us
Thank you.
today. Thank you to all of you who have joined us as live in this webinar. And again, please encourage folks to go to Amity and sign up and review this webinar later on and send us other questions. We'll certainly try and reach back out to you as best we can to answer them. And once again, the point that I made before, if you've got very specific questions regarding your condition, speak to your healthcare provider, speak to Dr. Mensah, Dr. Bowman, reach out to Sammy, and let's help you individually travel that path to healing that you're looking to travel. Thank you again for being with us. Sammy, thank you so much for being with us today.
Thank you.
One last reminder, Integrative Mental Health Summit. Go to integrativementalhealthsummit.org for information about the October conference. I think I've plugged enough things for now. We'll see you next time. Thank you so much.
Bye, everyone.